With the presidential election in November now fast approaching, it looks as though the primary candidates are expected to be former Vice President Donald Trump for the Republicans up against current Vice President Kamala Harris for the Democrats. Crypto policy has been only loosely discussed through the campaigning cycle. And so right now we've got Ari Redbord joining to help break down where policy might shake out. So Ari, talk to us. Is there one side that seems more crypto than the other right now?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And just from a little context level setting here, this is the first time in U.S. politics we've had any discussion about crypto in a political campaign. And it is really, it's taking up resources from every branch of the U.S. federal government, which is also very exciting today. In terms of the candidates themselves, right, you have Donald Trump, who has been very forward leaning on, at least over the last, several months, on his support of Bitcoin, on his support of innovation and of the industry. He's speaking at the Bitcoin conference in Nashville. So it really feels like he's sort of embracing the space a little bit more. And look, the Biden administration, or now of which Kamala Harris is part, has the baggage of 4 years of enforcement actions and other types of activity that's upset the industry. So I think that's where we stand today. But I do think it's really important to say, look, now Kamala Harris is a different candidate than Joe Biden. And she has close ties to the tech industry in California, where she was attorney general and then ultimately a senator. And I think this can play out a lot of different ways than just, hey, Trump is pro-crypto and the Democrats here are anti, which I think is the narrative you see, but I'm not sure it's really the right narrative.
Well, let's talk a little bit, Ari, about some of the entities who are actually enforcing and actually, putting a place on the enforcements against crypto. Dealing with crypto's instability after the FTX exchange collapsed was one facet of the Biden presidency. And under the oversight of SEC Chairman Gary Gensler, who had been appointed by President Biden. Now, Chairman Gensler went after unregistered securities and blocked the Bitcoin ETF until US courts overturned the SEC's decision. From where you sit, was Gensler acting under Biden's orders explicitly, or were those his own independent policies?
I don't know. I don't know. But what I can certainly say is that, look, regulators are going to regulate. And I think the reality is that obviously the enforcement actions there have been many, and they have been severe in the space. And I think what we see right now is the courts working through those. But ultimately, I think most sides, or at least both sides of this, would agree that Congress really needs to step in. And what businesses are looking for, whether you're part of an enforcement action or you're a business looking to engage in the United States, are clear rules of the road. What we hear from folks that we work with, whether they're financial institutions or cryptocurrency businesses, is, hey, look, what the legislation says is really important, but actually having clarity on the rules that we need to follow, right? How do we drive without a speed limit? So that's really what we're hearing. So look, the enforcement actions are an important piece of this. And with a new SEC chair, a new CFTC, a new administration, you might see significant changes. But on the flip side, in order to really get the clarity that businesses need, you need Congress to act.
Let's talk a little bit about former President Trump's position, Ari. He once called Bitcoin a scam, but his viewpoint does seem to have flipped. And he does plan to attend the upcoming 2024 Bitcoin convention in Nashville. So what does that tell you in terms of the Republicans' position on crypto regulations?
Look, it can mean every number of things from, I think on the one hand, hey, is this just pure politics? You have, a lot of crypto owners, crypto investors, crypto voters, so to speak. Is it just sort of appealing or pandering to that group? Or maybe the better narrative is, look, I spend my entire life trying to use data on illicit finance to convince policymakers that, hey, look, there are ways to mitigate these risks. Try to convince them to change their view that crypto is only used for illicit activity, only used for scams, right? So for me, to believe that someone has been convinced of this is a real reality too. So either way is possible, but regardless, at the end of the day, you do see a candidate who's talking about cryptocurrency, who's engaging with the space, who's talking to the industry, and I think that's a really good sign. Look, one point on this is I have always believed that technology, cryptocurrency, blockchain, digital assets, these are nonpartisan, bipartisan issues, right? We want to be the place in the United States that leads in this, like we did in the internet, in the age of the internet in Silicon Valley. We want to be that for blockchain and crypto today. This should be a nonpartisan, bipartisan issue that we get together on and say, hey, look, we want to build this in the United States.
Well, Ari, to your point, in recent times, crypto regulation has been bipartisan, right? Bipartisan support has been achieved in Congress recently with respect to regulating crypto. The Senate voted to overturn the SAB 121 rule that would allow financial firms to custody crypto assets. Biden, in fact, vetoed it. So why did Biden block that vote?
Look, I think that there's obviously, to your question earlier, it is Joe Biden's SEC. And I think that this president certainly said, hey, we're going to follow the recommendation of the chair of the SEC here and really sort of double down on it. I don't have much more inside baseball than that, other than to say that, I think a lot of folks in the industry were very sorry to see the way that went down.
Let's talk about the Republican vice presidential candidate, Ari. Let's talk about Ohio Representative J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is ex-Silicon Valley. He's an ex-venture capitalist himself, but he has been very vocal about his disapproval of big tech. He's shown praise for the FTC chair, Lina Khan, for her work against supposed monopolies. What do you think Vance's stance could be with respect to crypto, given that he's already indicated that he's, anti-big tech today?
Yeah, no, it's a really great and nuanced question. So really, I think it's the jumping off point to a larger, more important conversation. But I think the reality is, look, the beauty of crypto, the promise of the technology is no single point of failure, right? Decentralized value transfer at the speed of the internet. And I think what that does is essentially is a challenge to big tech. And I think very consistent with JD Vance's views. Now, certainly you have Silicon Valley, you have all kinds of big tech behind crypto building in the space as well. But I don't think there's a contradiction there at all. In fact, I think that crypto, the part of the promise of cryptocurrency is decentralization, as opposed to sort of the arguably the tech monopolies that we've seen in the age of the internet.
It has been shown to fail, though, Ari. We've seen hacks in crypto. We've seen hacks into wallets. There are single points of failure, right? It's not the case that it's foolproof. So what do you think the perspective would be of someone like J.D. Vance, who's, familiar with issues like security, given his days in Silicon Valley previously?
Yeah, no, I love the question. And, I think that and this is what I end up talking about all the time and really lean into is, look, the promise of the technology, that sort of cross-border value transfer at the speed of the internet, has also allowed illicit actors to engage in hacks, to engage in fraud and financial crime. But the power of the technology itself, right, the native qualities of blockchain allow you to track and trace the flow of funds, to stop bad actors, to mitigate the risk from hacks. And I think that if there's a candidate, and I certainly have spent a lot of time with policymakers on this topic, if there's a candidate that really, really understands this, that, hey, we can leverage this technology to actually stop bad actors, to build a safer financial system, then I think that candidate will definitely get a lot of support certainly in the crypto industry.
Ari, you've made a lot of references to the promise of the technology, and there are still clearly issues with the reality of it rather than the promise today. Nonetheless, to your point, it is a technology that cryptocurrency is gaining more spotlight, it's gaining more share of mind. And policymakers are looking at the underlying blockchain technology to see if it's got applications relevant to what they perhaps would be more receptive to. So with that in mind, what's the likelihood that the US will introduce a federal digital currency?
It's hard to say. We've been, the Fed has been studying one for some time. I will say, like, as a data point, and I think these are important, just like every other country in the world is on their crypto regulatory journey, almost every significant country in the world is studying or has a CBDC today. I think that we've seen a lot of folks say, hey, look, why do we need a CBDC when every stablecoin, 99% of fiat-backed stablecoins are tied to the US dollar, right? Isn't that sort of a better way to export our values across the world? So I think it's a we'll see. But clearly the Fed is studying it. And the real question is, do we need one? You hear a lot of times it's couched in this, is it a space race with China for a CBDC? And I really reject that. I think, look, the US dollar is still the reserve currency for the world. And I think there's still a legitimate question as to whether or not we need a CBDC or not. And I do think that's why we need to continue to study that.
Well, Powell did actually note during his Congress testimony in March that it's still quite a long way off.
And I think that is a consistent statement that we've heard over the last few years.
Ari, let's talk a little bit about Ethereum. Ethereum spot ETFs have hit the market for the first time. They recently received approval from the SEC. So it looks as though Chairman Gensler is moving somewhat towards allowing more of these ETFs to come to market. Talk to us about future regulations with respect to Ethereum as compared to Bitcoin.
Yeah, really important point. And if you actually ask, you pull aside the blinds and you say, like, what are the significant events in the last year? The ETF movement has been, I think, just absolutely critical for the industry. And I think that the ETH ETF is arguably more interesting because what it does is really, I think, bring Ethereum and interactions on that blockchain to many, many more users who maybe would not be engaging with it the way, the way crypto owners and investors are today. And why that's important is, ETH is where people are building today. On Ethereum is where people are building today. That's where DeFi is taking place. That's where lending and staking and NFTs. So I think that the market getting access to Ethereum through a safe and traditional way is a really way to increase interest in the space, writ large. From a regulatory standpoint, I think it's also a big move, right? Bitcoin has always been the thing everyone has looked to as a store of value. And I think Ethereum is something folks have looked to build. And I think it's really exciting now that, average, everyday citizens who are used to dealing with Wall Street now have access to ETH through this type of vehicle.
Ari, we've got 102 days to go till Election Day. This is going to continue to keep coming up. So thank you very much for sharing your perspectives with us. Appreciate it.
And thank you so much for having me.